Alex Vazquez is a community organizer for the Maryland organization called CASA. He's lead organizer in Montgomery County, and they just put together this effort. CASA had this march to put pressure on. I mean, we have a housing crisis, as we all know. It was was not given enough attention, clearly. But the march was to put pressure on the housing crisis in relation to immigration and climate. Alex, thanks for joining the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. How are you?
Of course. Very good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
So, Alex, let's just start off with what CASA does.
Yeah, so CASA is a nonprofit organization that fights for immigrant rights. We're one of the largest immigrant rights organizations in the Mid-Atlantic region. So we do work in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, now most recently Georgia, and we have members from all across the United States. And so we do a lot of work when it comes to not only immigration, but also housing and other social justice issues as well.
So you're based in Montgomery County, and from what I know about Montgomery County is it's very close to Washington, D.C. and the Beltway, and there's a lot of money there, and I imagine there's a bit of a housing crisis there. Just to start with that little region, we can expand. Can you explain some of the dynamics of how that's it? And there was also, well, actually, just go ahead.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'm one of the organizers in Montgomery County. Obviously, it's one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, and housing costs are going through the roof. And Montgomery County is actually one of the most diverse counties in the United States, where a lot of communities, a lot of immigrant communities thrive. And they're really feeling the pressure of just high rising costs. You take a look at the average price for a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and a lot of people have to make hard decisions, especially coming out of this pandemic or still ongoing pandemic, where a lot of people lost their jobs. They had to, make some tough financial decisions. And so people, especially in the immigrant community, especially our members, CASA members, people that we work with a lot in the community are really having to make tough decisions on whether they have a place to live and whether they can afford affordable housing in Montgomery County.
Before we get into the march, there is an election coming up next year in Maryland, a gubernatorial election. And last time around, it was, the Republican who is your governor was seen to be more moderate, not Trumpian. And a lot of Democrats didn't seem, as concerned with having him. What are and there's a lot of other legislative issues in Maryland that make it sort of free reign for special interests to just take over your state. So what are the implications of the political situation on housing?
Well, I think this time around, the pandemic has really put priorities amongst community members, right? Mm-hmm. And it has shifted. So, for example, in our organization, priorities, a lot of the top priorities for our members are ensuring that they have access to healthcare, but also, once again, it comes down to housing, ensuring that people still have a roof over their heads. So when it comes to this election cycle, we're really looking for candidates who really support affordable housing, who really support the top progressive initiatives, healthcare for all, and ensuring that that people just have money in their pockets to be able to afford these necessities, basic necessities that we have. And so that's what we're really looking for in these upcoming candidates, a wave of candidates who are potentially running for that governor's seat.
All right. So you did this, you had this march, and what was the goal of the march, the intention, when you decided to lead this?
Yeah, so we've actually had several marches, but the main purpose of these marches is to ensure that Congress passes the Build Back Better portion of the Biden administration's agenda, right? And so I know that they just recently passed in the House the Build Back Better portion that has a lot of these social justice issues that are very important to our community. We're talking about climate justice, we're talking about immigration, we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about healthcare for all, paid leave. And so now what we're doing is we're really focusing on targeting Senate Democrats, right? Mm-hmm. Where the bill has been kicked over to the Senate, and we are really pushing for them to really get this Build Back Better plan passed before Christmas. So that way, a lot of the families across Maryland, across the United States. A lot of our members can really enjoy the benefits of just having a life that is full of dignity and that, that is affordable for everyone. And so when we are out there marching, we're out there marching with people who have been impacted by these issues, but also will benefit from these issues. And we're just really, really urging for the Senate to get this done as soon as possible.
How are folks responding? I mean, I know that there's lots of pressure points for specific senators who are holding things up or using, lots of excuses to hold things up. But where are the pressure points that you're pushing right now? Like, who are you trying to push in the Senate, and what is the specific message that you're trying to push?
Well, we're really targeting the Senate leadership, right? We know that we have some obstacles that we're facing. But we know that the Senate leadership can get it done. We're targeting Chuck Schumer and ensuring that he gets all the votes necessary to get this Build Back Better plan passed. And so, ideally, we are really targeting everyone because it's going to take all the Senate Democrats to get this bill across, and obviously the vote of the vice president. But we are really looking to see what the Senate parliamentarian says, especially when it comes to the part of the immigration. Right. We know that she has kicked back other proposals that we have had that really include a pathway to citizenship that many of our members and the millions of immigrants across this country deserve. And so we are hoping that she's willing to accept, even though that's not what they deserve, this registry plan, or this Plan C, what we call, right, that adds parole to it. But we are really looking for every single Senate Democrat to vote on this and to really come through for the American people, because that's what they ran their elections on, and we are holding them accountable for that.
When you watch Fox News, they have completely punted the crisis at the border to Biden as if they didn't have any role in this. And we're aware of, everybody on the show at least is aware of the Obama administration's role in border, security and how, the folks call him the deporter in chief. But without a doubt, it grew to absolute crises, horrifying humanitarian crisis at the border under Trump. And I was reading, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I was reading something yesterday that I was actually very surprised that, and I don't think the Biden administration is doing a good job communicating this, that they have actually registered the majority, and there's, vast majority, 75% of those that have been held at the border, and they're en route. And that was one of the big complaints, was that, it was just like a complete disaster to clean up the situation that Trump created, in which, separating families, not being able to track, their babies and small children that were separate from their parents and may never see them again. And to be able to do this detective work all while there's a COVID crisis, all while there are folks who continue to come through. And then there's another crisis that happened in Haiti. And, and so we saw what's been going on at the border, not to mention, of course, DHS and how the Border Patrol, those images that came out of the Border Patrol members on horseback. Mm-hmm. So, it's complicated, obviously, and it is a humanitarian crisis. How is this impacting the work that you do, and how would you, if you feel comfortable, how would you rate how the Biden administration is dealing with the crisis at the border?
Yeah, well, listen, when people come to this country, they're coming because they are escaping violence from their country. Sometimes there's, we have natural disasters that bring them over. And they're really looking for us to be that beacon of hope, right? To ensure that they feel safe and that they start a life here in this country of opportunity that was funded on just immigrants from across the world. Mm-hmm. We are pretty disappointed in the administration's response on how they are handling the border, in the aspect that we're still seeing the images of how border police, and I see that you have the video up right now, right? Whipping Haitian immigrants that are trying to come over here. We still see those footages of people jam-packed at those border facilities. And so it makes the job difficult, and we wish that the Biden administration held their word when they were running on the campaign, saying that
Yeah.
their goal was to close these detention centers and have the process of accepting more asylum refugees and restarting the process of really processing people who are coming over, and we're just bringing them into the community. And so we are very disappointed in the process and how things have been handled. We obviously think that it could be handled a lot better. And just in Maryland yesterday, just alone, right? We're not waiting for the Biden administration to make moves, whether they can decide if they should be opening detention centers or not. Yesterday, Maryland passed two huge immigration bills. One is called Dignity Not Detention, where it's going to prohibit ICE from having any detention centers in Maryland. And another one is the Driver's Maryland Privacy Act, where ICE can no longer access database from government agencies, state government agencies, especially the Motor Vehicle Administration. They will need a judicial warrant from a court. And even then, they still have to notify the delegation of when they're accessing this. So states like Maryland are already taking measures to ensure that they are protecting immigrants who are being abused by immigration and who are using tactics to lure people in, and just everyday people who are driving to work. We're not talking about criminals, but just everyday people who are doing everyday things. So
this is interesting because I wouldn't expect Maryland to be at the forefront of that. How did this get passed? Like, what was that's major coalition work.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously had major coalition work, but the stories from community members, the stories that kept appearing. In Montgomery County alone, we had two stories that made national headlines, and where a gentleman was cutting a tree and was detained by the Department of Natural Resources Police. Despite Montgomery County having its own sanctuary bill to protect immigrants from being asked immigration status, we still had state police agencies who were coming in, and they detained him and handed him over to ICE. And then just about a month later, ICE agents swarmed a gentleman's house in the same vicinity, just 5 miles apart from each other, using the information that they got from the database, the MVA database, to locate him. And this really just came out of the stories that kept popping up, and the community came together. We lobbied really hard for the last 2 years. CASA members shared their stories, and we really put a lot of pressure on the delegation to say, hey, look, listen, this is happening in Maryland. We need these protections. These are everyday working people who just want to go to work, and who are stuck in limbo because our immigration system is just so out of line and so dysfunctional that they have no pathway forward to citizenship, which is why we're really pushing to ensure that in this Build Back Better plan, that there is a pathway to citizenship, because many people deserve that.
It's amazing that you were able to pass that. My final question, just related to that subject, is once folks are put through the registry and processed at the border and given refugee status, and they come to Maryland, what's next? I mean, how do people find housing? How do they find community? I mean, it's just from start to finish. When someone leaves their home, say they come from Guatemala. I met somebody this year who went through this entire process, and he told me step by step along the way about how he had to take out a loan in Guatemala from essentially a loan shark, and he's going to be paying it off. I mean, to us, it wouldn't seem like a lot of money, but based on the wages in Guatemala, he is going to be paying off this loan for 10 years. So he takes out the loan, and then he has to get through. He wasn't from Guatemala City. He lived near Lecatitlan, and so he had to go through Guatemala to get to the border, and then get to Mexico, and then go through Mexico, and there are several stops along the way, and houses where he has to stay with hundreds of people, sometimes thousands, and then he finally, and it's dangerous. The coyotes are not like the nicest people, and neither are the people who they're with. He told me about the fights that would break out between a Mexican thinking he was higher up than a Guatemalan, and a Guatemalan thinking he was higher up than an Ecuador. It was insane to hear about the dynamics. And then he got to the border, and was kept at the border, and then they moved him to another facility, and then he went to West Texas, I believe, And then that is when, and they were in this truck. They could barely breathe in the truck underneath the boards of the truck, like packed like sardines, totally inhumane. Barely could breathe. One guy was having an asthma attack, and they pull him over, and that's when they detain him. And then once they detain him, this is under the Trump administration, they put him, they take him to a house where he stayed, barely could sleep, squished together like this, way too many people for one room. And he was there for like a few days, and he was being fed like an egg in the morning, like something very small for lunch. Then they took him to this is the part that really killed me out of everything, because I'd never heard this before. They took him to a workers' camp. That's my description. This is ICE. And ICE took him to this camp and said, we're going to send you back to Guatemala, but you have to earn the money that we're going to hand you once we drop you off. And you get, I think it was $1 or $2 a day. And so for 7 days, he farmed. And he said that they lined him up before that. They lined them up with shackles around their neck, their wrists, and their ankles. And I tell the story over and over because I don't think people really understand what is happening. So say you're able to, that's just that process. And he was sent back to Guatemala. But if you are able to get through and then you make it to Maryland, now you got to find housing. Maybe there are family members there. Maybe there's work. Maybe there's not. How does anybody navigate, especially if there's language issues? How does anybody navigate?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult process, right? And once again, that's one of the reasons why we passed dignity not detention in Maryland, because ICE detention centers, if you've ever been to one, it's just a very, very, nothing prepares you to see what's happening, right? And that's just what we can see. I can only imagine what's happening behind the scenes. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people come over here with nothing, absolutely nothing. They get through that whole scenario. And so they come to Maryland. So what's next, right? Well, luckily, we have a lot of organizations in Maryland that can help out with that process, right? That organizations like CASA that can really help, establish getting you an ID and perhaps connecting you to affordable housing programs that can get you started. And that's why it's important that we really set protections for a lot of immigrants. Because imagine coming to Maryland and then not able to have, those protections, not able to find funds for affordable housing. In Montgomery County alone, Montgomery County passed a lot of pieces of legislation that really gave funds to a lot of people in the undocumented community. Funds that are not available unless you have some sort of permanent status. Funds, for example, we had Montgomery County had a version of a stimulus check that went out to families who were undocumented. We have a rental assistance program that families can apply for if they fall behind on rent or if they even need assistance when it comes to rent. And so there's a lot of good programs out there in Maryland. And that was only made possible because our community members have fought, because they have experienced firsthand what it was like. Such as in the story that you were talking about this individual, where they came over and they had absolutely nothing. In Maryland, we have driver's licenses for people who were also undocumented. So the first thing is just really going to a state like Maryland that has all these protections and all these available resources. But at the end of the day, what's really going to help a lot of people is ensuring that they have some sort of pathway to citizenship and are able to establish some sort of permanent residency here. So that way they can apply for even bigger programs to give them more financial assistance. So that way they can apply for jobs where, the wages are 10 times better. And so that way they can even apply for schools. So that way they can increase their level of education and just have so many more opportunities and doors open up to them. And so that's why we are really pushing for this Build Back Better plan to ensure that everyone in this country, especially our immigrant communities, have available resources. So that way they don't go to a state and then say, what's next? So that way they have available resources to take advantage of.
And, and for those, I'm not sure they'd be watching our show, but for those who are like concerned about, we can't afford it. Well, guess what? You're going to pay for it somehow. And it's going to come out of the budget somehow. Would you want to take the humane path or do you want to take the inhumane path? And I think, it's preventative measures by supporting as many people as possible in their pathway to living, a healthy, wonderful life in this country. And let's not forget, the majority of small businesses are owned by immigrants. So there is an investment. Our immigrant community, I mean, this is the country that we live in. It's what we, quote unquote, our legacy is, I guess. Some of our legacy, leaving out other parts, but at least the immigrant side, the Ellis Island narrative, this is a big part of who we claim to be, and we might as well follow up through it. So, Alex, I appreciate you. Thank you for joining us today. Good luck. Keep us updated. Hope to have you on again very soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.